It is mid-November and I am full into my Persephone period. Less than 10 hours of daylight, nothing really growing. And I have put the garden to bed for the winter. I thought I would talk about what is lurking under all of those leaves for anybody else that wants to build their soil over the winter. Okay, the sad thing is these beds don't have to be empty. There's a ton I could be growing in winter, even, yes, in Michigan. I'll do a video on that next time. But I just didn't get my winter garden in time. There's just too much going on this year. I figured as long as the beds are empty, I would take advantage of that downtime to build the soil. And if anybody else would like to do the same, this is cheap. The only thing you need is time. If your beds are empty over the winter, it's a great time to do it. So 2 techniques. First, the main technique. This is a classic fall cover crop in this bed of field peas, oats, and down below, some hairy vetch. Why these crops? Peas and hairy vetch both are in the legume family, and they fix nitrogen out of the atmosphere, move it to their roots, and make it available to other plants. When you terminate the cover crop, all of that nitrogen stays in the soil and helps build that supply for next year's crops. Oats put down a large fibrous root system, and when they die back and their roots are left in the ground, you get a lot of organic content from it, plus they help to aerate the soil and create these little pockets for oxygen as they degrade. You can see my high-tech tool here, 2x2 scrap piece with rope tied to both ends that I use as a handle while stepping in the middle of that scrap piece. To show you this process, I started from the edges, just tucking all the extra material inside the bed so it would be where I wanted it, and then I used my tool to flatten everything down. View from above, you can see these are really small steps, and I'm just stepping directly on the stick as I work my way down. The reason you do the small steps, showing it from the side, is that they will shingle together as you go and create kind of a nice dense mat across the entire surface of the bed. And you do want to step pretty hard to really snap the plants off right at the base of the soil as you go. I worked my way all the way down the bed, and you'll see when I got about 3 feet from the end, I turned around and went the other direction. That was so that material would shingle inside the bed, and it does require a little care where those two come together. I then went back a second time and did the entire bed one more pass just to make sure it was all super flat. To give you a sense of what the crimping does, here is a bed before, and here's this bed after being crimped. The next step was to lay down leaves. You can see I'm taking extra care to tuck it in along the edges and get that cover crop well contained underneath. And I'm working in sort of the direction of the grain. I'll do a still image here. You can see the cover crop's laid down, and I'm dragging the leaves from one end to the other to help encourage that. I did need 2 full packed down bags of leaves in order to cover the bed. You want to make sure you get a really thick layer of leaves on top of this to help terminate that cover crop. This is a very deep layer of leaves. I'd say it's probably 7 or 8 inches deep. And if you look at the finished bed and think about what's going on down there, the cover crop has been shingled flat. That creates a little pocket of air above the soil, right where the plant was laid down. Then you've got the leaves sitting on top of that. That's another insulating layer. And once my snow comes and lands on top, the snow itself has pretty good insulating properties. It's pretty fluffy. All of that means that the soil, way down beneath all of that nice, lovely comforter that we've put on top of it, is staying pretty warm. And because the soil is staying fairly warm, relatively speaking, this is Michigan, but it won't freeze solid. And that allows the recomposers, the worms, all of the other fun invertebrates down there to take all of this organic content that I've added to the soil in the form of the cover crop roots and help break it down quickly. That would happen much more slowly if I allowed everything to freeze solid. That's kind of the main technique. But then I have another area of the garden, all the way there in the back, those back 2 beds. And when we put in the garden, we started the compost at the front, and then our contractor sort of pushed it towards the back. I tried to spread it as best I could, but those beds in the back have pretty thin soil. They just didn't get the topsoil or compost that I wanted them to get. I used a different technique back there to really bulk up and add a ton of soil to those beds. But instead of just planting a mix of peas, oats, and hairy vetch, back here I used a blend that also contained daikon radish seeds. Here are the beds in the back that had daikon radish added to the mix. The radish did a couple of things. One was that these leaves, as they came up, created nice microclimates that helped everything else sprout. So I got a really good cover crop back here. But the main advantage of the daikon radish are their huge taproots that they send down deep into the soil. Here's one that I pulled out of the ground earlier. Let's see the root size on this. This wasn't even fully mature. And here's one still in place. Kind of zoom in down here. You can see that root driving way down into the soil. And these guys are no joke. They really break up the soil and add a whole bunch of content to it. Instead of starting by crimping this, I started by weed whacking it with a string trimmer. I'll get into why in a minute, but I went through and I used a regular old string trimmer to cut this down, and I saved the material as I went. You can kind of tell from the spray here, but this was crazy messy. Good times. Guessing this is a familiar sight to anyone that's ever done any real amount of string trimming. As you can see, this doesn't take cover crop all the way down to bare soil. There's still, I don't know, a couple inches here of material at the level of the soil. After weed whacking, I needed to collect all of that debris, and I went around and raked it up and compiled it for my next step. I gathered up a lot of our leaves into a pile, and I used that board laid on top to stomp them down and flatten it. This was about, I would say, 9-10 inches high before I flattened it. Now it's about 4 to 6 inches. I took all of that fresh green material and laid it down on top of the leaves. Stomped it flat one more time. From here, my husband / life partner in crime ran over the whole thing for me with our lawnmower to get it all chopped up and give me a nice mix of browns and greens for a compost mix. And I applied that on top of the bed, mixed in with that stubble, and I let it settle into place. And over time, it nicely drifted down and worked its way against the top of the soil. After that, you could see the cover crop standing up here on the left. I went through and crimped it, and you can see that here, sort of lower right. Laid it flat just like I'd done on the other bed, but now I'm trapping that compost mix beneath it. And then I covered the whole thing with a layer of leaves just like the other beds, and ultimately got a nice finished product. Not gonna lie, that was a total pain. I really don't wanna do it again if I don't have to, but I am anticipating that the combination of the roots decomposing in the soil, all of that extra compost mix that was down at the base, and then the remaining cover crop debris being shingled over top of that, plus the leaves on top, is a massive layer of material that hopefully will bulk up the soil and add a bunch of depth and a bunch of organic content very quickly. But if your soil is in pretty good shape and you're doing this as more of just kind of a best practice, method one, way easier. A quick note on covers. You can see this one behind me. When you put the leaves on, you will need something to help anchor it in place and hold it down until eventually your fall rains, your winter snows weigh these things down and they mat themselves in place. You're gonna wanna hold them down with something just to keep them from blowing away and ruining all of your hard work. If you were doing this in the summer, so you wouldn't have fall leaves, but let's say you had a cover crop that you put down after your spring stuff and you wanted to quickly kill it off and put down your fall plants, you would need to use a black tarp. You would need to have it over the cover crop remains and getting hot underneath, absolutely no light. Everything will kill off quickly. You can tell I have used a porous cover over these beds. Light gets through it, but more importantly, rain and snow will get through it, and they will thoroughly saturate the mix of cover crop debris and leaves, really wet it down, help it break down, and create a nice bank of water from which my spring crops can start drawing when I put them in. If I had a black tarp over it, I wouldn't get that same benefit. Also, for me, having a few little survivors in there that don't get reliably killed off through this process, as far as the cover crop goes, is fine. Some living roots in my soil over the winter are a good thing. They will help to maintain the soil life. They will help get those microherds nice and happy. And come spring, I don't have to plant these right away. I've probably got until March. If I find after the snow melts that there's some surviving cover crop in there, I can put a black tarp down then and thoroughly kill everything before I have to plant into it in the spring. That's it for this one. I hope you all actually have winter gardens going, unlike me. But if you do have empty beds, I hope that this tip is helpful for how you can use them over the winter to help build up your soil and get a healthier, stronger, and happier crop next year. Until next time, thanks.